45 week on the Paper Crafters Library blog. Every day this week we'll be featuring different projects using Graphic 45's gorgeous tropical Travelogue collection. Today's project is this set of Seaside holiday decorated glass coasters and coaster holder, and I've broken it up into two separate videos. In this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate the coaster holder. So as I decorate this coaster holder, I'm actually doing it live because I only have one. So you're going to be following along on my process of doing this, mistakes and mishaps and all. Now, whenever you're working with pieces that you found at a thrift store, garage sale, antique store, one of the recommendations I've read is that you don't want to sand it down necessarily because you don't know if there was any lead in the paint. I guess it depends on how old this is or where it was made. Now, I'm going to be covering all of this with paper, but where the paper overlaps, so where the corners are, I'm going to be adding a little bit of this green color, this lettuce color, which I've chosen because it's the closest color I could find in my stash that matched with the paper that I'm planning on using to cover this with. Now, in order to make sure this true color shines through and I don't have to do tons of layers in order to hide this dark, I'm starting with some gesso. This is the Claudine Helmuth Studio Gesso by Ranger, and I've just got a small brush. And I'm not worrying about covering the main surfaces. I just essentially want to cover where the seams are. And the reason I chose gesso is because gesso really works on a variety of different surfaces. I use it in all my mixed media and art journaling, so I kind of figure that it probably will work with this. At least it can't hurt. I don't have any scientific basis for that, but generally on everything I've tried it so far, it has worked, and I have tried it on wood before. So I'm not being too careful about where I'm painting. As I said, I'm just making sure that I cover my corners. So just using my brush, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to dry this with my heat tool and apply a second coat of this. So as you can see here, I have all the edges of my coaster holder have been covered with my gesso. So I'm just cleaning off my brush, getting all that gesso off, and then I'm going to take my lettuce color, and rather than using the paint dabber, I'm just going to dip my brush right into the bottle. I'm going to take some of that paint, and I'm now going to go over the corners. And again, I'm not worrying too much because I don't think you're going to see all that much showing in between the layers of the paper, or where the paper edges meet. But just in case you do, I don't want them to see white. I do want them to see green, so it's not quite as noticeable. And you can see the paint is sticking very nicely to this because it has that gesso that it can grip to, whereas I'm not sure how it would do if I was painting it right to the wood. Plus, you get the true color of the green. It's not darkened up or dulled down by the darkness of the wood. So I'm just going to go ahead with my brush, and I'm going to brush over the gesso and make sure all my corners and edges are covered with my lettuce paint. So I've covered it with my lettuce, and it's all dry now. And I just did one coat of the lettuce because it has the white underneath the several base coats, so I thought the one looks like it provides enough coverage. So now the next step is to figure out what size pieces of pattern paper you need. So what I did was I simply took a ruler and I measured all the sides. Now for this side, which is an odd shape, it goes down with the that little curve, what I did was I measured the height and the width, and that's the size to which I cut my pieces. So the pattern paper that I'm using is Exotic Destinations, and it's the same one that I've used for the same pattern that I used for the coasters, but this one came from the 12 by 12 pad. And as you can see, I cut it to match the size of my sides. So I did one for all four of the outsides, the little strips, the two insides there, and then the two insides there, and then one for the bottom, for the inside bottom. For the bottom here, I'm going to be covering this with felt. So whenever you're altering any piece, you take your ruler and then you cut it to size. And generally, I tend to cut it just a hair bigger, so that just to make sure that I don't accidentally make it too small, or if your piece is a little bit off kilter, your dimensions aren't exact. So next step now is to start with each side and cutting it down to size. So there's a couple tools you're going to need. You're going to need scissors, you're going to need a pencil, a hobby blade or craft blade, a cutting mat, which I have off to the side right now, some of the multi-medium mat, and a paintbrush, because we're going to be applying the paper using the multi-medium mat. Now before that though, we have to cut it down to size. So here I have cut this strip of paper at 1 3/16 by 4 1/8, and as you can see, it sits nicely inside my coaster holder. So I'm now just going to flip this, and I'm going to take my pencil. I've got my hand underneath holding it, and I'm not pressing down too hard, but I've got my pencil, and I'm just trying to trace a faint pencil line where the edge is. You can see that there, and then I'm going to cut along that, and that'll just make it easier to trim. Otherwise, the other option would be to stick it on and then to try to very carefully use a craft blade and follow along the edge and cut the paper. So you can see I've cut that to size. So now I'm just going to make sure it sits in there okay. And there you can see what that looks like. And I'm going to do the same for the other side, and then we'll go ahead and stick them down. So with both side pieces now cut, I'm going to take a little bit of my multi-medium. I'm going to spread it on the inside surface. Just try to brush a fairly thin coat. And then I'm going to take my paper and I'm going to slide it in there. And then use my craft scraper just to smooth it out. And it also helps me get into the corners. You could also use a bone folder if you have one to just kind of help smooth everything out. So there you can see it's now stuck to the inside. Now it is overhanging the top a little bit, and that's where I'm going to take my craft blade, and I'm very carefully going to slowly just sort of hold it in place, and then should cut away from me so I don't cut my fingers. And then just very carefully cut away the paper there. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a delicate work. It's not that easy. You do want to make sure your blade is sharp, otherwise you're just going to chew away your paper. And I'm trying to cut rather than sawing back and forth, which I was doing before and not such a good thing. What I'm doing is I'm sliding my blade out and then I'm just pulling it towards me. So I'm only actually cutting in one direction, and it's giving me a much smoother cut. And as you can see, what it's allowing me to do is to trim this paper close to the edge. And because I'm not being too vigorous in my cutting, like I'm cutting slowly, and I'm not applying a ton of pressure, I'm also not cutting into the wood, because that's the other thing you have to be careful of, that you don't cut into the wood. And you can see there how on this side I've fixed it. So now it's just this side that I need to cut. So I'm going to trim that side, and then I'm going to apply the second piece of paper to the inside on the other side. So as you can see here, I have my paper along the inside now, and I've stuck it down and I've trimmed it. Now this one ended up a little bit rougher than I wanted to. This was my first go before I had actually ever done it before. So I'm just taking my sanding block and I'm just very carefully smoothing the edges. It is sanding away the color, but I'm going to show you a little trick for fixing that up afterwards. But before we do that, the next thing we have to do is to take the medium and then brush a coat on the inside. So we're sealing our paper in between two coats of the medium. That's also going to give it a little bit of extra durability. So I'm going to do that with both sides. So I finished adding my matte medium to the side pieces, and I've also added some to the top here. So we're now ready to work on the inside here. And this is tricky because, as you see, it's not a straight piece. There's this little lip that's about 3/8 of an inch inwards, and then it goes down in this way. So what I did for this was I took my ruler and I measured the distance from here to here, which was 1 3/16 of an inch, and then I measured the distance from here to here. I drew it out on my piece of paper, and this paper I had cut to, I think it was 2 and let me just measure that again. it was 2 9/16 by 2 3/8, and I based it on this side measurement. And then I would just keep sliding the paper in until it sat properly. And each time I would work in small increments, shaving off just a very small amount from the sides until I had as perfect a fit as I could possibly get. So there you can see what that looks like. And I tried it on the other side, and it fit well there. So for my second piece, instead of doing the whole measuring thing again, I simply took my second piece or I'm simply taking my second piece rather, since as I said, I'm making this as I'm filming, and I'm just using that as my guide for where I need to cut. So now I've got my 2 side pieces that I can tuck in. Let's see how this one does. Perfect. And you can see they fit. So it's just near the top here that I'm going to have to trim. So I'm going to apply them the exact same way that I did for the inside side pieces. I'm going to take my medium and I'm going to apply a coat. Now I'm also going to do the same for the base piece. I had measured a piece, I measured the inside, and I measured it, I took my ruler, measured it this way, and then I measured it from inside edge to inside edge, and that gave me a piece that was 1 13/16 by 4 1/8, which is going to sit on the bottom. Now because I have my inner pages, I may need to shave this just a little bit. And then I'm going to stick that down in exactly the same way.